Welcome to another episode of the Reboot Chronicles, a no-holds-barred forum with global leaders, authors, entrepreneurs, and CEOs about how organizations stay focused on growth and innovation in unprecedented times. I'm your host, Dean DeBiase, coming to you live from Reviv's North American headquarters in Chicago, and we would like to thank you for joining us from around the globe today. I'd like to welcome Scott Miller to the program today. He runs thought leadership for Franklin Covey, which is a pretty big deal. We'll get into that. Those of you that don't know, Franklin is the world leader in helping organizations face challenges and achieve results through people, which I love. Scott, welcome. Good to see you.
Dean, thank you, man. Appreciate the platform.
Weather in Salt Lake looks good.
It's beautiful. I'm outside today, which is rare for a podcast, but it's such a nice weekend. I decided to host this outside.
Smart move. So Scott, those who don't know, he's an Inc. columnist, of course, and best-selling author of two books, which I actually love. I've picked them both up. And one's called, that we'll talk about today a lot, is How to Move from Management Mess to Leadership Success. And my favorite title, Everyone Deserves a Great Manager. Isn't that the truth? But he's also host of one of my favorite podcasts, which is called On Leadership, part of Franklin Covey. I just really like your format, Scott. And you've had many of my friends on, like Seth Godin and Dan Pink and a bunch of them. And today what we thought Scott and I would kind of explore is leadership challenges that a lot of us face day to day, the things we struggle with, like, creating actionable type of visions and leading kind of difficult conversations. Who knows, this could be a difficult conversation. We'll see how it goes. I feel like you should be interviewing me sometimes. And how to kind of inspire trust in people, I think is really important as well. And basically, how can most of us become a leader that people actually want to follow? So Scott, before we kind of dig into your thought leadership and a couple of the books, I just want to go on record, like, I'm a big fan of the late Dr. Covey, and met him a few times over the years, and have always been a fan of how he grew this company from almost nothing into this big, public global enterprise. Right. Most people don't know that. Can you give us some kind of scope of the breadth and depth in your business model and what you guys are up to?
Sure. And as you mentioned, Dr. Covey was one of our co-founders, passed away about 8 years ago as the result of a head injury from a bicycle accident. He was in his 80th year. This actually is the 30th anniversary of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Dr. Covey was a professor, right, who spent better part of a decade researching all the success literature on what makes great leadership. And that was really the formation of our company, along with the Franklin Planner and the Franklin Planning process. And now we are, I think, by most measures, the world's largest and most prestigious leadership development firm. We focus on strategy, execution, time management, productivity, project management, sales performance, leadership development. We've sold over 60 million copies of all of our books. We're based here in Salt Lake City, public company on the New York Stock Exchange, offices in almost every country in the world where the U.S. State Department says it's legal. And we're thriving in the midst of the pandemic. We're still surviving, because people need to engage leaders, and leaders need to engage their teams and cultures. So I've been in the firm for just shy of 25 years. Wow. In 9 different careers: sales leadership, was the chief marketing officer for 8 years, and now I serve as our kind of chief thought leader, if you will. Yeah,
I think you have the best job in the company, quite frankly.
Thank you, man.
I teach MBAs and exec ed at Kellogg, and we use a lot of the 7 habits. Not we, but some of us, the professors, use the how do you kind of actuate the habits and stuff. So Dr. Covey's son, Sean, has been kind of rebooting that along the way. It's 30 years in, who would know this book is still popular, or at least the concepts are. I didn't know you'd sold 60 million of all your content. Yeah. But I'm curious, how have you rebooted the 7 habits, and is it helping people learn how to better run and lead remotely?
Yes and yes. So the 7 habits are timeless principles, right? These are relevant regardless of the century, the culture, the company, the country. Dr. Covey didn't invent these habits. He actually uncovered what he thought were 7 principles that were key to interpersonal effectiveness. What he did, as you know, is he named them, he sequenced them, numbered them, organized them, and then brought them into a common nomenclature. He created a common language for people from engineering and from public relations to work together in organizations. So the content hasn't changed at all. Sean Covey, who you know is one of our 2 presidents, he leads our education division. He authored the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens. That is today the most successful team leadership book in history. His books have
Wow.
sold 10 million copies. So at my suggestion about a year and a half ago, I said, Sean, I said, let's, for the 30th anniversary, let's reboot the 7 Habits, which of course is our best-selling leadership development program still. Let's reboot that. And why don't you add an insight after each of the 7 Habits on how you've seen the 7 Habits come alive in a school district, in a tech company, in a non-for-profit in Indonesia, right? Whatever it was. So Sean wrote about 15,000 words. We relaunched it a week ago. It became a bestseller again yesterday on the Nielsen list. And so we think it's going to breathe new life into principles that people just need to be reminded of, right? Now, common knowledge isn't common practice. And so Dr. Covey used to say, to know but not to do is in fact not to know. So that's why we've reissued the book and the training program along with it.
I think a lot of listeners can identify with that, to know and not to do. It's one of our great skills. I think, that's an interesting concept. How do you kind of, as a thought leadership leader, how do you actually take content, and you have so much in your platform, your website is chock full of thousands of resources. How do you make sense of it all? Because some of the advice is conflicting. Some of it's, more leadership, more, for instance, like rebooting the 7 Habits into teen. Brilliant. I wish I'd had that when I was a teen, quite frankly. I might buy it for some people I know now. But how do you make sense of all that in your role?
So we are not trying to be the Amazon of training, right? We're not trying to be the largest aggregator. We're not trying to license everybody's content. We have a very deliberate focus. Jack Welch, Jim Collins, Ram Charan, good friends of our company and CEO, they've really done a fantastic job of helping us narrow our focus, right? So we have 7 specific practice areas, and we look at what are the most pressing problems that our clients are facing. What types of problems can be solved with a change in human behavior. That is what our expertise is. We change mindsets and we change behaviors. If you want to accomplish something new or do something different, you got to change your mindset. So we're mainly focused on 7 areas, like I mentioned earlier: executing strategy, leadership development, sales performance, productivity, and so on. My job really is the new public relations. Thought leadership is talked about a lot, but gone are the days where you're issuing press releases, right? Or you're calling up a journalist in a newsroom. There are no journalists. There are no newsrooms anymore on the corporate side, right? So my job is to make sense of it through selling and curating best-selling books, digital, audio, print. Audio is, as you know, on an upswing, right? Digital is a bit flat, print's flat, but audio is huge. Hosting this podcast, keynoting, articles and columns in magazines. So my job is to make sure that these dozen or so thought leaders in the company are out talking about our expertise to those business leaders who have a problem that we can help them solve.
Right. So you're almost like the magnet. It's the next gen PR.
That's it.
You're right about the journalists. It's like you can talk to yourself. You write for Inc. I do Fortune and Forbes. It's like, just write it yourself. No. There's still real media out there, especially on the business side. There's a lot of, everyone's looking for skills, but your key, I think, is the actionable execution. Actionable results is, to me, is the missing link. That's what we try to teach a lot. So let's dig into you. I love one of your quotes, that how you label yourself. It's a little self-deprecating, which I love, which you basically call yourself an unfiltered leader thriving in a highly filtered corporate culture, which is probably why I moved to Silicon Valley years ago. So I really identify with that. What does that mean?
Yeah. So for those who are watching me, I apologize. The sun is just hitting me out of my back deck. So it's not the Lord paying me a visit. It feels like
it's a good look.
It's my moment. I'll start with that. So I worked for the Disney company in Orlando, where I'm from, for 4 years. Disney invited me to leave, which was a nice way to say get out. And the Franklin Covey company invited me to join them 25 years ago in Provo, Utah. So here is a single Catholic boy from Orlando moving out to Provo, Utah. Do the math. This is like a Jew moving to Vatican City, right? This is probably not a good combination long term. And so Franklin Covey was a very conservative culture. I'm much more sort of charismatic and loud, and I tended to say what was on my mind and be a bit unfiltered. I tended to be, as our mutual friend Seth Godin taught me, I tended to confuse being reckless with being fearless.
Uh,
And it's an idea that Seth has really worked on me. Scott, you think you're being fearless, you're actually being reckless. Reckless with your own brand, reckless with other people's feelings, reckless in the culture. You can be fearless and not be reckless. So Disney 4 years, very conservative corporate culture.
very.
Franklin Covey, Utah, very conservative corporate culture. I've been privileged to have risen from the bottom to near the top. I report to the CEO. I'm an officer in the firm. And so I've had to find my voice, right? Can I find my voice in a conservative corporate culture? And I did. And they also met me sort of halfway. So I've had to be very deliberate on managing and building my brand inside of a corporate culture where sometimes I knocked up against. I had to break myself against it because corporate culture is always going to win, always, right? You have to
Exactly.
figure out how to either find your voice in it or find your voice somewhere else.
Well said. Yeah, I've been on the end of that stick too.
Yes.
Find yourself somewhere else. And were you there when they went public?
I joined the Covey Leadership Center. So as you know, there was the Franklin Quest company that was
Right.
the planner
The
company. They
planner.
were
Yep.
public. And there was the Covey Leadership Center. They were a private company, a leadership firm. I joined in 1996, the Covey Leadership Center. And in 97, there was the merger, and we became the Franklin Covey Company together.
Yeah, reverse merger public. I've done a couple of those. What was it like? What did that do to the culture at that point?
It was tough. It was tough for probably
Uh,
2 or 3 years because, although we call it a merger, I mean, in essence, the Franklin Quest company acquired the Covey Leadership Center.
right.
They were about 3 or 4 times as large as the Covey company. But the fact of the matter is, the Covey culture was so strong, and the content that Stephen Covey brought. I will tell you, over the course of time, the vast majority of the executives were pulled from the Covey side, and the Covey culture actually, you might say, absorbed the Franklin Quest culture. It was a tough time. We were, refashioning ourselves. Franklin planners were starting to go out of vogue, right? And technology and the Palm Pilot and Microsoft was coming in. They
Right.
were selling 40 million planners at 180, I think, plus retail stores. So
Those
it
of
was
you
a
new,
tough,
those of you that are new, those were like thick books, excellent planners,
yes,
but they were paper.
yeah. I mean, I carry a
Still have
planner to
one?
this day. It
Yeah,
happens to be Michael Hyatt. I like his planner actually the
that's a
best.
good one. Yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
one.
it's a love. It's great, full focus. Everybody's using paper in some format, right? I use it for notes and for
Can't get away
tasks.
from it. Yep.
I don't choose to. Yeah, but it was a
Yep.
very difficult cultural merger. There you go, cultural merger. Yeah, we survived and thrived.
It's actually good. There's a lot of companies that did not have that outcome where they merged and the wrong culture took over.
Yep.
So even you went through what I call the brain damage phase. Just going public is part of
Yep.
it, but the actually coming out of that the other end probably made you a lot better.
It
So
did.
it's so based on your Orlando experience, Disney is quite a behemoth. You kind of know what it's like to fail and to grow. My issue with teaching leadership is most of us don't like to talk about that journey. I actually did that last night with my students, where I took them through how do you kind of find your purpose in life and how do you kind of blend all that. And you can't do that without telling them a heartbreaking story. So I told them the one about myself. But so I don't think we share that enough. But one of the things I like about you is you actually do share that. You share it openly and you share it in a very relatable way. How does your story help people kind of see, gee, I can get through this. I can actually grow and come out of this better,
I'm glad you asked that, Dean. I think vulnerability is a leadership competency. I think gone are the days of
which
these
we
big
don't like,
hierarchies. What's that?
which we don't like. Everyone
Which
does not
which
like
which
to be
which
vulnerable.
which some don't like. I actually like being vulnerable because what I find is that people cleave to leaders who they can relate to. Now
Hmm.
they can still report to me. I can still terminate them. I still have responsibility for their, outcomes with them. But I think people respect leaders that they can relate to. They respect leaders who care about them and can sit down and say, "Well, let me tell you about a doozy that I, incurred in my earlier career." You build loyalty and trust with people when you can own your mess, and then you make it safe for others to own their mess. When
Right.
you make a culture, when you model a culture. So I wanted to write a leadership book that was different than all the rest of these CEOs and C-level people that was hard to relate to, and everything was perfect and worked out, and maybe you showed a gratuitous challenge here and there. I didn't want to
But
write a confessional,
yep.
but I wanted to say, you know what? After 40 years in business and 30 as a leader, here are 30 challenges, ironically, that you're going to face. And here's how I messed up most of them, not all of them. But if you can learn from my mistake, It's a huge gift I can give people. You know, being a leadership executive in a leadership company who wasn't a great leader most of the time. In fact, I don't think most people should be leaders of people. I think
Yeah.
too often leaders are lured into it. You've talked about this on your program, and you've written that not every founder should be a leader. Not every owner should be a leader of people. Not
Right.
everybody should be an anesthesiologist or a commercial airline pilot.
Mhm.
Not everybody should be a leader of people. But if you are, then I think being vulnerable is a chief talent and competency, because people will cleave around that. People do not quit leaders who love them. They do quit bad bosses and corrupt cultures. They choose to stay if they can relate to and learn from their own leaders' successes and from their messes.
Yeah, and you see that in some public companies, the top guy, the CEO or even exec chairman says, "Listen, um, I am somewhat visionary. I can lead this company. I know what we need to do, and I'm going to
Yeah.
hire like a number two to actually lead the people.
Yes.
They're honest with themselves. It's like I don't want
Yes.
to deal with all this stuff. Not everyone can be Jamie Dimon, right? So
Yeah.
that is a
And I
great
think you
point.
don't see it enough in entrepreneurial companies, right? Where you have the founder or the owner,
Nope.
they insist on being the, you know, the operating COO or CEO, when they might be better as the chief revenue officer, right? Or the chairman or the chief investment, or, you know, you name it, officer. It takes a lot of courage to recognize what are your strengths and to complement yourself around them. It takes vulnerability, it takes humility, it takes a lot of
Yeah.
confidence to demonstrate humility, to actually bring people to complement your strengths and your weaknesses.
Yeah, exactly, and be honest about it as well. So when I picked up the book, I scanned through the 30. I'm curious about many things. What are some of your favorite ones, most relatable to people? One of the things that I love that you talk about is make sure I wrote this down right, the pitfalls of talking too straight. I have been
Yes.
accused of this, the,
Yep.
the straight
Yep.
talker. I struggle
Yep.
with that. What does that mean for everybody? I thought
I
we're supposed
think
to be
that,
straight. We're supposed to be straight talkers, right? That's
yeah.
leadership, isn't it?
Well, partially, right? I mean, challenge 2 in the book is leading difficult conversations. I think it's arguably one of the most, if not the most important role of a leader,
Hmm.
is to give people feedback on their blind spots and be able to discuss the undiscussables: performance, character, interpersonal communication, your time management skills, your punctuality, whatever it is, right? Your
Right.
ethics. So you have to be able to lead difficult conversations. But the challenge is oftentimes people who are senior leaders have no shortage of of confidence, right? Or of courage. What they lack is diplomacy. And so there is an art to
I think
talking straight.
we call it consideration, I think,
We
right?
call it consideration. It's also known as diplomacy, right? Is that leaders who move from mess to success, they
Hmm.
are willing to discuss the undiscussables with their colleagues. It might be your personal hygiene. It might be how you treat and speak to women in the office. It might be how you are aware of your own unconscious biases and you're a model for improvement. But when you talk to other people about their challenges, you have to balance courage and consideration, because you can verbally eviscerate someone. You can damage someone's self confidence, their self esteem, their self worth. You can deliver hard news in a soft way if you care. And so I think there's that important balance of talking straight, but doing so in a way that actually leaves someone better off when you're done with the conversation than when you started. And if your intent is pure and you take some time to really understand what would it be like to be on the receiving end of this conversation, you can have a transformational experience with someone when you balance high courage with high consideration. Now the problem is sometimes you have leaders that are too diplomatic, they're too shy, they obfuscate, and then the other person leaves scratching their head thinking, I'm not sure what that was even about. And then the leader goes back to the board and says, yep, the COO is very clear, one more time and they're out, because they were so shy, they were so diplomatic. It's a balance, Dean, of high courage and high consideration.
I remember there was a book, you probably remember this one, Situational Leadership. It was
Kim
very
Blanchard.
popular. Yeah,
Yes.
Ken.
Phenomenal book.
So I worked with FedEx. Fred Smith loved that book, and he had us
Huh.
all read it, and it was really good. I know it was a grid and all that, but it was
Yeah.
like how I'm going to talk and work with you, the CEO, is very different than
Yes.
how I should be
Yeah.
talking to the
Yeah.
Kellogg students or
Yeah.
the up and coming VP that just maybe needs different. That seems to have gone out the window a lot. Like, do you see that coming back? That kind of profile. It's almost like you're profiling your audience and talking to them accordingly, So most of the CEOs that you and I work
Yeah.
with, they just want the straight talk. Like, okay, just cut the speech, tell me what's
Yeah.
going on. But that's very rare.
I don't know that it ever left. I'm a big Ken Blanchard fan. The man is a class act, was a dear friend of Franklin Covey and Stephen Covey's. I think, I have 3 sons, right? Right now they're 6, 8, and 10. I treat them all fairly, but I also treat them differently because my oldest Thatcher is very different from my youngest Wentworth. And I don't mean to equate parenting with leadership, but there are some similarities. And our CEO, he talks to me very differently than he talks to another member of the team because he and I have strong straight talk. We have a high level of courage with each other. He can call me out, I can call him out. He's much more demure and diplomatic with perhaps some other people. It takes him 1 minute to tell me huge feedback. It might take him an hour to give it to somebody else. So I do think you can treat people differently while still treating them all equitably and fairly.
Yeah, and honestly, not sugarcoating stuff, which
Right,
is how
right.
some people equate it. So tell me about some of the other. Let's see. We took away
Yeah,
two. We still have 28 other things we can give people tips on.
yeah. I think the third challenge is listen first. It's so difficult for most leaders because once you've made it into a leadership role, you've spent the majority of your career being perfecting your communication strategy, right? Your
Right.
influence mode, persuasion mode, clarifying, reclarifying mission, vision, values, goals. Speaking can be quite selfish. Listening is quite selfless. So great leaders are empathic leaders. They recognize that most of us tend to listen with the intent to respond, not with the intent to understand. So as a leader, if you want to move from mess to success, you recognize that all these great questioning techniques that you've learned, peel the onion, get to the root cause,
Yep.
those don't work with people. That you have to be very thoughtful about moving off your own narrative, your own field of experience, your own mindset, and move on to their timeline and their narrative and their mindset. Which leads me to another one, which is making time for relationships. Dr. Covey wrote the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He
Right.
did not write the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Efficient People. There are 2 types of mindsets, an efficiency mindset and an effectiveness mindset. And what is it? One's not bad and one's not good. And I'll bet a lot of your listeners are like me. If they've been very successful in business, it's probably because they're very productive, efficient people. I mean, like you, I get up at 4 a.m. I write my ink column till 5, I write my books till 6. I'm a dad from 8 to 9. I'm a CMO from 9 to 8. I'm a dad again. I'm writing again. I'm a very efficient person.
Right.
It served me very well in life. But you cannot be efficient with people. You have to move from an efficiency paradigm to an effectiveness paradigm. And it takes conscious and deliberate movement. Dr. Covey said, with people, fast is slow, and slow is fast. I think one of these
Exactly.
big insights is around with relationships, you have to be effective and you have to check your efficient propensity.
You're absolutely right. That's almost like an axis. The effectiveness and efficiency. I've seen
Yeah.
far too many, let's just call them C-level, not CEOs, but then they get it. They treat everyone with efficiency and they think that is
Yes.
the way to do it. And now in the age of, let's just call it Zoom to plug a name, but all types of technology that we're using, people are actually getting more efficient. They're like, I have 17 seconds and then I have to push this button, get on the next Zoom. I'm like, don't do that. Stop, think, right? Make some notes,
Yeah.
thank people. I think it's getting a little worse right now. Hopefully we'll
Look
get
them in
back
the
to,
eye, turn off your phone. If you were in person, close your laptop.
yeah,
Uh,
that's always a good one. Staring at your,
yeah,
what?
exactly, right.
But
Or these new Apple watches where every time someone looks at it, I think that I'm wasting their time or they're bored, and I'll say, "Do you have to go?" "Oh, no, 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 I got a text." And I'm a pretty secure person, and I
yeah,
don't bore a lot of people. But when you look at your watch, 12 times during an hour meeting, at some point you're sending a message to me that your email and text are more important than our eye contact.
yeah. Wait till your kids start doing it to you. You'll love that. Um, so the sorry, the large corporations, I call them BFSs, big, fat, and slow. It's not a negative term, but they have to
Mhm.
struggle with. They have so many layers and so much process. And what what is some of your new programming that's getting them
Yeah.
to bust through that stuff? Yeah,
Yeah.
everyone's all about agile and all this stuff, but you know what? Sometimes it doesn't work in a multinational $12 billion company on a day-to-day basis, especially if you're
This will,
making things like
yeah,
medical products, cars, it's not, everyone kind of says, well, gee, this is what Twitter and Google does. I'm like, they're not like, they don't have scientists inventing, the next generation of vaccine. It's a whole different type of company. So yeah, what's been your message to those companies these days?
this will sound convenient. Dr. Covey's oldest son, his name is Stephen M.R. Covey. He
Yeah.
wrote a seminal book called The Speed of Trust. This book has sold 2 million copies, and his tagline is nothing is faster than the speed of trust. I think
Wow.
that these big, slow companies, when you have a culture that is rooted in transparency, that is rooted in high trust behaviors, where you declare your intent, where you don't obfuscate the facts, where you show your cards, where you trust other people to show their cards. Nothing is faster than building high trust and high transparency throughout your supply chain, throughout all your vendors, throughout all levels of the organization. When you trust someone, the faster, the speed at which you can get work done is remarkable. When you have mistrust, you leave voicemails, you send emails, you BCC assistants, you BCC HR, right? You don't walk down to their office and sit down and solve an interpersonal issue that could be because two leaders aren't getting along, their whole divisions now start fighting. I think modeling the 13 behaviors of
Hmm.
high trust leaders that are outlined in the book, The Speed of Trust, can move like nothing else. The speed at which organizations operate exponentially. Nothing is faster than creating trust amongst leaders because then their teams model it, their teams practice it, and it's true, right? When I have a bankrupted trust account with
Yep.
somebody else in the company, then our teams grind to a halt, right? And
These
we
are
email
the
back and forth.
these are the people that leave you big emails on Friday night, things you should fix, and expect to have it done by Monday. It comes out in very different behavior. Sometimes they don't mean it,
Yeah.
but their style is just not in tune to a trusting, nurturing culture. So that
Versus
helps.
picking up the phone and
Yeah.
saying, Dean, I apologize if I was rude to you in yesterday's meeting. I am sorry that I blew my lid. I was wrong. Can we talk about some of the 4 issues we have facing us so we both can get this back on track? I mean, that takes a big person.
Wow, I've never heard anyone say that to me. But I probably haven't said that to anyone either, to be
Wow.
fair. That's a good one. Before we wrap up, I always ask without signing an NDA, what are you working on? What's next? I know
Yeah.
you've got a book series coming up, but
Yeah.
we'll list out all these books that we've talked about. We've dumped a lot of titles on people so
Thank you.
they can pick them
Thanks.
up. But yeah, what's next for you at the office and out of the office?
Yeah. Well, I'm out of the office for I think the long-term future. This is my office out here.
It's
Not
beautiful.
too shabby. I'll move inside when it's winter. As you mentioned, I'm privileged to now host the world's largest leadership weekly podcast called On Leadership with Franklin Covey. And like
Amazing.
you, with the exception of my stature, like you, we have, large guests in terms of their influence and authorship and CEOs. I'm writing a book for HarperCollins called Master Mentors. It's
Ooh, I
an
like that.
annual series. I'll do it hopefully for 10 years. And I'm curating every year 40 of the most influential, transformative insights. So Seth Godin, Dan Pink, Liz Wiseman. I've got some great people signed on to it. Susan David, she wrote Emotional Agility,
Yeah,
the
she's
Harvard
good.
Medical School psychologist. This morning, Stephanie McMahon, who's the chief brand officer for WWE, signed on. So I'm picking out 40 insights and writing a book called Master Mentors. It will be out in January. There'll be a volume every year. I'm writing more books in the Mess to Success series. I'll be writing Marketing Mess, Communication Mess, Parenting Mess, Sales Mess. So there'll be about a dozen Mess to Success books out in the next 10 years. So a lot
You
of
just
writing,
Yeah,
a
I
lot of
like
speaking.
that. You just described my life, all those messes. That's
That's why I'm writing about them. I'm an expert at them.
I love I love it. I love the honesty. I love I just really
Thank you,
like
Dean.
the direction you're going. Great company, Scott. I really appreciate you coming on. You've been listening to Scott Miller, Franklin Covey out of Salt Lake City, and hope to see you next time in person in the studio.
Look forward to it. Thank you, Dean.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Take care.